I also talk about rebalancing ourselves with the seasons. You know how we all do quarterly planning or something for our businesses? And I just wasn't getting it. It wasn't resonating at all. I was working with a business coach at the time, and she said, "Well, what would you do?" And I said, "I think I would go almost month to month, almost like with the seasons." And so we developed it that way and put the qualities of the seasons into our planning. That's kind of where I came up with the honoring the seasons within our own lives. And you can also do it in your business as well. So taking that time in winter to rest, planting the seeds in spring, having the joyous celebration in summer, and then in fall, honoring change as we watch the leaves transition, and also letting go as we watch the leaves fall from the trees.
Hello, friends. It's me, Donna Bell, your host of another episode of To Hum is Human, the podcast where we explore the transformative power of tuning into our intuition to express our passionate purpose. In this episode, The Hum of Nature, Reconnecting with the Earth to Awaken Your Intuition, we talk about how nature speaks to us, how intuition can show up in everyday life, and what it really means to walk in harmony with your soul's path. It's a grounded, heart-opening conversation, and I think you're going to love it. Today, I'm joined by Michelle Cutler, a psychic medium, an intuitive life coach, and founder of Walk the Path Within. Michelle has this incredible gift for helping people reconnect with their inner truth through the wisdom of the natural world. With a background in conservation biology and training in mediumship from places like the Arthur Findlay College in the UK, she brings together spiritual insight and a deep love for the earth. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate the ways in which you engage with people in finding their own wisdom. And Michelle, I want to go back in time a little bit. So the moment you discovered nature as your special place.
So it's very interesting because I'm not quite sure I have that one epiphany that helped me understand that nature was my sacred space. It was kind of a subtle journey throughout life. And I would often say that it's the absence of nature that I experience in my life that really helps me to see the abundance of nature. So I was very lucky to grow up with nature all around and experiencing different things with, it's kind of back in time when we didn't have as much concrete and asphalt, as I say. But then as you grow up and you start to experience the world, then you start getting that absence of nature.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I imagine it was like a playground. If you're surrounded by that much wilderness, were you near the woods? Were you near mountains?
So it's funny, but I grew up in Southern California, which we think of today as being very well developed. But back when I lived there in the 70s, if I date myself, the area that I grew up in when I was really little had a lot of orange groves and horse farms. So I did live in a neighborhood, but I had that around me. And then moved out to the boonies, and that was all beautiful hills and big oak trees. But we also had a ski boat, so we would go skiing and camping. I also was part of the Girl Scouts, so we would go do all our camping that way as well. So it was always around me and nurtured me through my childhood.
That sounds so lovely. Because when you think about the early years of childhood, sort of what's around you and how you interacted with it does really impact you, whether you realize it or not. Now, you guide others to connect with their soul selves through the natural world. What does that connection look like for you personally, say on a regular walk or even in stillness?
So for me, it is a lot about listening, being still, absorbing what you see around you, whether it's just a quick jaunt outside to reconnect, I usually say recharge my batteries because that's
Mhm.
kind of what nature does for me. Or if I were to take a longer walk or even vacation, a lot of times we would vacation out in the wilderness. For me, it's really about listening, seeing things that might not quite always be there when you're just listening to music or something. I really like to listen to what's out there and connect to something greater than myself because nature has so much to give. And if we listen, we can hear the messages that it's willing to give us, whether it's in an animal stopping by or the breeze or just those downloads that we
Mm.
spark in our mind that come up with amazing ideas.
Mm. If you could share a time when an element of nature, like a tree or an animal or a landscape, offered you a message or insight that then changed the course of your life.
I think there are many times in my life that where these messages have come through. I want to say that one was a heron that had come through. And it was funny because I started seeing herons fly by my car, or I would see one sitting in a marshy area, and I just admired it as a heron.
Uh-huh.
But then I was going through something and I was over in London and I was taking a walk through Hyde Park, which is so beautiful.
Mm.
And I had gone all the way around the pond and I was standing there and I looked across the pond and I saw a heron and I stopped and the heron flew over the little water and landed right in front of me and kind of danced around. And of course, I'm getting my phone out so I can record it.
I'm like, this isn't
And
happening. Yes, it is.
yes, and I watched it and it kind of stayed there for quite a while and then it finally flew back. And to me, that was a sign. So I went and looked up in my, I think it's Animal Speak. There's a couple different books.
Mm.
And you can also look them up on the internet if
Mhm.
somebody comes across an
I do
animal
it
that
all the
they,
time. If I see it
yeah,
more than once, okay, I've got to look. Yes.
yes, exactly. And so I think we see animals or we see things that are just common in nature. But then we see the things that aren't as common or they keep coming back. So that's when we know it's a message. In that aspect, I knew it was a message. Yeah.
I'm fascinated by your work in conservation biology. And first of all, what is that? And how are you pulled to study this specific subject?
Well, I went to Colorado State University and I was in their natural resources department. And my degree was in natural resources, recreation, and tourism, and then I did an interdisciplinary study in conservation biology. So the natural resources part was really about the human dimensions of natural resource. How does the animals, wildlife, conservation interact with humans? You're looking at the national parks and seeing what the carrying capacity might be for elk, for instance, and how much that land can support while you have X amount of elk. So it's not going to decimate the land too much, but it's going to support, and you can bring, of course, things like tourism and such into the parks because elk are a big thing that people do like to see. It's more about that human dimensions. And the conservation biology piece of it, I remember we had a big project we had to do at the end. And my husband and I lived in Colorado at the time. So one of our fun jaunts that we used to go to all the time was Yellowstone National Park. And they
Mm.
had an institute there and they would put on classes. And the class that we went to was looking at the introduction of the wolf back into Yellowstone. How did that help support all the other animals? Meaning, once they had a wolf kill, such as an elk or a buffalo, how many other animals did that one kill feed? And how did it support all these other animals? And so we went out and we would look two magpies or one coyote or what have you, and we would write the data down for how much that one wolf killed when they were done, how much they fed. So that's the conservation part of it. How is the ecosystem going to support that piece of land? And it was very interesting that the wolf put the balance back into the ecosystem when they reintroduced it. So things like the pronghorn, the babies were in decline, the young ones, because the coyote populations were so large. When they brought the wolf back in, it lowered the coyote populations, then those would go after the pronghorn babies. So then the pronghorn babies started to live,
Mm.
and then you had that balance back. So
Yeah.
it's a huge ecosystem, and we forget that even the smallest little things like bugs and insects that we might not be interested in do have their part
Mm.
for the rest of the land. So it's a very delicate balance. And I
Yes.
think sometimes we think as humans that we can pick and choose, but we have to look at the totality of it all.
There is such a chain reaction to every aspect that's part of the cycle of life, and specifically in that area, that it is a national park and everything's being monitored, and so they can really do careful study when they introduce something back into the environment. Now, you've studied at the prestigious Arthur Findlay College, and including your degree in conservation biology and natural sciences, those are two very different paths on paper. Can you take us to a moment when those threads first began to weave together in your life?
So, yeah, I think they were on very separate paths for quite a while. I had always had this interest in intuition, mediumship, but I had this fallacy in my mind that you were just born with it. So
Oh.
you saw spirits, you knew how to do all this stuff, from birth. And so I kind of thought, well, I don't have that. But, I would always watch psychics and mediums on television or buy books and read about. And it wasn't until later in life that I believe I saw John Holland do a mediumship demonstration. It was my very first that I had seen. And it was in Colorado when I was living there. And he explained that you can develop this. And so that kind of started my spark into figuring out, well, I do have intuition. I know things about people. So where do I take this? And so that
Mm.
was my beginning development of mediumship.
Mhm.
And so I found my path that way. But all along this time, the conservation was very strong in me. And so I was doing a lot of outreach, environmental education type of volunteer work, or I even worked for the Nature Conservancy one summer, and then the Bob Wilderness Foundation
Mhm.
another summer. So my feeling of spirituality, of being connected to something greater than myself, was when I was out in nature or even doing mundane things like weed eradication. We would do that for the Nature Conservancy. And we also did that for Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation. So there was this feeling of spirituality out in nature, but I didn't quite put the two together until much later. And I read a book by Florence Williams called The Nature Fix. And she went through tons of studies about how nature is healthy for humans.
Mhm.
And it helps us physically, mentally. It puts us in the right frame of mind.
Mhm.
It physically can lower blood pressure. For me, it helped me regulate my adrenal system.
Mhm.
So, putting those studies with the spirituality of how I felt out in nature, that started coming together. But it was one day when I was kind of driving and you're having these thoughts in your mind. And I so admired my colleagues that had something like Reiki or shamanic healing or all these energy healings. And I love having them done to me, but I would try to learn them and it just wasn't quite right.
Mhm.
And it just popped into my head that nature is my healing.
Mhm.
And so nature is my modality. When I put those pieces together, I realized that the spiritual or the intuition and mediumship can be nurtured in nature. And I've come to know that it supports the human side of us, which is where we're, taking the kids to school, we're going to work, all that kind of stuff. So it helps that side of us. But it also helps our soul side. So we
Mhm.
feel something greater than us when we're out in nature. We also can get those healing pieces of it. Our mind starts to clear. the intuition starts to, we can listen to it better. So that's kind of where the pieces came together. Again, it's always a long journey for me. I never
Well,
get it right
well,
away.
it's very organic, it's not forced. It just sort of unfolds at this beautiful pace. And I was reading something about why forest bathing or being out in nature, walking makes people so happy. It's like there's also this thing called the Schumann frequency. I don't know if you've and read it, but it's basically the Earth's magnetic field energy, and it's like a happy frequency. And when we're out in nature, we are just exposed by this frequency. And that's why we feel so much better and grounded. And in a way, like you were saying, then we become more open because we're relaxed to receive any guidance that could possibly come through at that time. But just admiring nature and just being in that state of awe kind of gives you that there's something bigger than me. And, just even perspectively, you're this little thing and nature's like this big thing around you. And it's just so magical. I love that. Now, you work with clients to sort of help them find their own path, because your path was also quite different. You kind of guide others to find their path. And I wonder, as you work with some clients, have you come across some that came in feeling just really disconnected and skeptical, but through your work, something clicked and something shifted? Can you share a moment like that?
I think the thing that I really realize with the clients that I have is that a lot of them put themselves last on the list. They are people that are such givers. They have such open hearts, but then they get to a point in life where they just feel something's missing. And one of the things that I try and encourage them to do is to be kind to themselves, to give themselves as much care and love that they give other people, and to put themselves a little higher up that list.
Mm,
Because when you heal yourself, then you have more of yourself to give. And
mm,
I think that's been a pretty good thread through a lot of my clients is learning how to put themselves a little bit further up the list
mhm,
and being out in nature, then they have that recharge. They recharge their batteries. So then they, in essence, have more to give to other people because they gave to themselves first.
Like they say, you just got to start at home first. And then,
Exactly.
you got to fill up and build your reserves because, it takes energy. It takes energy to care for other people. And most people, by the time it comes to themselves, they're like, I'm tapped. Like, I don't have anything left. And, I'm interested in how you incorporate nature with your clients. Like, what would a typical, well, I know no one's typical because it's very unique to every individual, but what are some of the things that you help them kind of go through in a session per se?
So I have two types of clients. One would be someone who I would do a mediumship or intuitive guidance reading. So just
Mhm.
basically a one time where I help them through something, whether it's mediumship to help them through grief or maybe just I'm just not quite in line on my path, which way do I go or how do I help myself? And then the other clients are the ones that work with me a little bit longer in like a life coaching, or I call it intuitive life coaching, and help them in a little bit more intense type of work. And with that, it's very individualized. So
Mhm.
it depends on what they want to focus on. Life coaching is very much client based. I basically show up saying, what would you like to focus on today? They get to pick and they get to feel what really needs to kind of be clarified within
Mm,
themselves.
mm,
And so it is individualized, but I would say I do like to incorporate nature. Not everybody is open to nature. And so I might sprinkle that in. But a
mm,
lot of people really love nature and they're like, oh, I do need to go back and reconnect. So
mhm,
whether that is just going out 5 minutes a day and standing with the sun on your face, or maybe even going out at night and looking up at the stars. I also have a visualization that I will do with them called Your Sacred Space in Nature.
mm,
And I will help them find in their own mind's eye their sacred space in nature. So when they don't have that time to get physically out into nature, they can take that time to quiet themselves and maybe just spend a few moments in their sacred space in nature in their mind's eye. Or maybe if they're struggling with something, they can go there and ask that question and have their own soul self answer that question. I really like people to find their own answers instead of always giving them the answer, because I believe that their soul is going to guide them. I'm just the person telling you I ask a question that will help them to see things in their own light instead of seeing it in everybody else's light.
There's something that speaks to you and you feel it. You feel it in your body. It's
Yeah.
something to get advice. It's something like, oh, well, try this, that, and the other thing. But when it actually feels good in your own being, there's something that keeps it more real for you. And in a way you also want to invest in it more because oh that feels so good, like I need more of that. Now as a practitioner and as someone who really works with helping and holding space for other people, how do you stay attuned to your own rhythm,
Oh,
especially when you're sharing your energy so generously?
yes, that's very important. A lot of times, as practitioners, again, we put ourselves last. And so we have to take that time for ourselves. And I'm very lucky to live on 12 acres. So I have nature literally right out my door. And I have horses. So I can, interact with animals, my dogs, my cats, my horses, but I also have those trees around me and just kind of nature at my fingertips. There's many times where I literally just have to go sit outside, or a lot of times that's my writing place where I like
Mhm,
to write is
mhm,
outside.
mm,
But I do like to take walks. I'm on a board of a small nonprofit around here, and the president really were going through something, and she really needed to bounce ideas off. And I suggested, let's go for a walk, and we
mhm,
did. And the ideas just start coming because we had
mm,
that. We had the physicality of the walk, we had the
mhm.
beautiful essence of nature, and I believe that it just really supported
Yeah.
it. So that's other ways that you can help yourself recharge. But I also want to say that another way of recharging that I do, and I tried to do this challenge for my clients and such, and I struggled with it a little bit, but I loved doing it. And it was a challenge to be kind to yourself every day for 30 days.
Mm,
And it wasn't always easy, and it could be as simple as just acknowledging at the end of the day that you really didn't have time to do something for yourself. I
mm.
mean, you don't have to do a big spa day, which that would be fabulous if you
Right?
could, but it could be as simple as writing 5 things you're grateful for at the end of the
Mhm,
day. Or one day I went completely off social media just to give my mind that break for that day, and it wasn't
mm,
easy.
mm.
So being kind to yourself, I think, is another way to that I would use to recharge as well.
Mm. That's such a beautiful reminder, really, because we can get caught up in the day to day.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like, unplugging is actually really hard when you think about how connected we are in that way and how much we do our business that way, how we interact with people that way. To like turn that off is kind of like, what did we do before smartphones?
Yeah,
What do we do before
absolutely.
laptops and everything? Those are really wonderful, beautiful reminders and ways that we can tap in. I know amongst your many other gifts, you're also an author and you recently contributed a chapter in the book, The Intuitive Entrepreneur, Deeper Connections to Soul for Soul Driven Success. You don't have to spill everything, but what can listeners look forward to in your chapter?
Well, my chapter is called The Healing Power of Nature, The Path to Awaken Your True Self. And kind of what I talked about a little bit earlier is I go through my journey with nature and then my journey in mediumship and spirituality and show where they came together. And I also talk about rebalancing ourselves with the seasons.
Mm,
And you know how we all do quarterly planning or something for our
yes.
businesses? And
Yeah.
I just wasn't getting it. It wasn't resonating at all.
Mm,
I was working with a business coach at the time, and she said, "Well, what would you do?" And I said, "I think I would go almost month to month, almost like with the seasons." And so we developed it that way and
mhm,
put the qualities of the seasons into our planning. And that's where I came up with the honoring the seasons within our own lives. You can also do it in your business as well, but I also do it within my own life. So taking that time in winter to rest, planting the seeds in spring, having the joyous celebration in summer, and then in fall, honoring change as we watch the leaves transition, and also letting go as we watch the leaves fall from the trees.
That's so beautiful. Rarely do we consider the seasons in our planning, unless, of course, our business is highly tied in with the seasons. If you're like a ski resort or a beach resort, I imagine you're very much aware of what's happening. But in essence, we go about our daily lives and the ways we work in sort of like a linear progression, right? And it's like
Definitely.
just keep going and understanding rhythms, like just like the seasons, that rest is equally important as it is to go and start new things. And so I think that's just a beautiful way to reflect on how to approach your life. To have this balance and have this rhythm. We could all use more of that, right? Because I feel like right now everything seems very imbalanced in what's going on in the world. And how do you find your center and how do you ground yourself? That sounds like such an amazing chapter.
Yes.
I know our connection is because we are both authors in this book,
Yes.
but I'm always interested in the story behind the person writing the book. And it's a beautiful way of sharing. It's a generous act of sharing, I think, when people talk about how their journey evolved and how they got here. And it's curious because you mentioned horses before. And the first thing that popped into my mind was, I don't know if you've been watching it all, or there's this whole thing about horses and healing where they actually put a table out in nature and then all of a sudden the horses come in. Have you seen those?
I
And
have not,
oh my
no.
gosh, they come in and as either the energy practitioner or a Reiki master, whatever, working on a client on the table, the horses start coming in and they just hang out. Like they get really close to the person on the table. And to me, that's really a sign that animals have such an intuitive sense about them. They know when we're hurting, they know when we're sad, they know when we're happy. Like they're very in tune to us. And so why not get sense of how animals interact with us in the world? I think most of the time
Absolutely.
it's nice to see them from far away or, we'll observe, but, just even with pets, how they interact with us and being open to that. And I was reading a little bit about your story. You're saying, and I loved how you're saying, oh, this myth that only people born with this quote unquote gift are the ones who are supposedly doing it. But, for me, this whole podcast is really about, what? We all have this intuitive capability. Can you share any moments when you were growing up where you felt, there's something going on here, but I'm not really sure what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a little kid, I was a very shy child, very quiet. My mom even put me into dance and acting and all this stuff because I was so shy, which was great. Because I didn't have the verbiage as a child, people would come up to me or I'd meet people and I'd be like, I don't like them. And that was not that I didn't like them, but there was something there that I was feeling or sensing. And again, not having the verbiage as a child, I would just say, I don't like them. And I believe looking back that that was me sensing something about somebody. And then people that I instantly would just interact with or really like, I was sensing kind of maybe their souls of this person is trustworthy and I can interact with them. And this person I probably should keep at arm's length. So I think looking back that was a big piece of having those intuitions when you were very young. And I also believe my dad had intuition, but he would never in a million years say that he did. But he would always say, I have a feeling. I was in show business as a kid and I'd go on these interviews.
Wait, do
So one time I was interviewing for a musical and I get the phone call that said, you didn't get the part. I was devastated. It was between me and another girl. And it went to the other girl. And my dad, I was crying, and my dad said, just wait. And I said, but dad, they called. I didn't get it. It's going to the other girl. He goes, I just have a feeling you've got this. And about 2 days later, my mom shows up at school, and I'm like, oh, do I have another interview? And she's like, no, they called. We've got to go. You got the job.
Oh my
So
goodness.
yeah, so I believe my dad had the intuition. He just wouldn't have admitted it. So I think all of us have intuition,
Mhm.
even if we're not willing to admit it, because it's those small things. That's not just a guess.
Mhm.
That is something coming into your knowing
Mhm.
that is telling you something. So yeah.
Well, just saying that you were a shy child growing up and then you're auditioning for these very
Yes.
public expressions, what changed for you? How did that even happen?
So I'm not quite sure if things changed. I lived my life in this dichotomy where I was still a very shy child or shy person. I still kind of am. But when I get put into certain situations, I was able to maneuver through that, like
Mm,
being able to sing or being able to dance.
mm,
I went through tons of classes of acting and such. I think repetition helps us learn something. And then, there were times where I would get super nervous at auditions, but it was something about just stepping into it and having to do it. I think that's what I learned most from being in show business as a kid
mm,
is learning to step into that position,
mm.
even though, you want to run and hide.
Well, I imagine in your mediumship work, do you do platform work as well, or do you mostly do one-to-ones?
I do very small gatherings of
Mhm,
platform work. The drive there, the nerves are going, but it's
mhm,
about stepping onto that stage or stepping into that position and knowing spirit's going to be there and knowing that it's all going to somehow work the way it's supposed to. Might not always work the way you want it to, but it works the way it's supposed to.
and a big part of that too is just surrendering to it and trusting that whatever is going to happen during that time is exactly what it's supposed to. Most of the time, I think when we get caught up or a little nervous or we tighten up is because we have the ideas of what the ways that things are supposed to be and then the way it actually is. When there's that disconnect there, it's a little harder to kind of get through that aspect. I feel like it's so tied to what you do now. There's something about
Mhm.
stepping into this place of power or nature or communication or engagement
Yeah.
and then letting things sort of carry through and help create through others. So right now, what are you listening in for in your life? Is there anything coming up in the near future that you're really excited about?
I'm very excited to be teaching a workshop this summer called Rooted in Nature. It's all about discovering and nurturing our creativity, our intuition, our mediumship through nature's wisdom. And I'm teaching that at Lilydale this summer.
Oh my
So I'm
goodness,
real
that's such
excited
a
about
big
that.
deal. If no one people haven't heard of Lilydale before, it's basically a spiritualist hub center, probably the largest in the US, right? And is it in New York?
Yes, it's in New
Yes.
York, I believe just south of Buffalo.
If you
Yeah.
look it up, Lilydale, it's famous.
Mhm.
And the fact that you're teaching there, that's so exciting. What are other ways or how do people connect with you? Where can they find you?
They can find me on my website. It's walkthepathwithin.com. They can also find me on Instagram, Facebook under the same name, Walk the Path Within. Yeah.
There's so many offerings. And of course, if you buy the book, The Intuitive Entrepreneur Deeper Connections for Soul Driven Success, you'll also see Michelle's chapter there. And what I love about this particular book is that there are 22 authors who share their stories. But not only that, they also give you tools as an entrepreneur, or like a lot of these tools can be used in life in general, that you can then have to work in your own way. So I think it's a beautiful book and I highly recommend it. Michelle Cutler, you just remind us that our intuition isn't separate from the earth, but deeply rooted in it. We come from the earth. And when we slow down and listen, like really listen, nature does reveal the wisdom that we've carried all along. And I feel like the way in which you work and the way in which you bring people closer to nature is just such a wonderful gift. And I just want to thank you for such a grounded conversation and for sharing your gifts with us with such heart.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to be here. And thank you for this opportunity so that I can share how much the love of nature is such a gift to all of us as humans and as souls.
Mhm.
And it's there, it's free. Just walk outside, and you can also experience the beautiful gifts that nature has to offer.
Thanks for being here. I hope something from today's conversation stayed with you or gave you a new way to look at things. That awareness, that pause, that's where things start to shift. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who might need it. You can learn more about my work and what's coming up at sonorouslight.com, and you can follow me on Instagram at @tohumIsHuman. Until next time, keep humming.